There is a moment in the life of some narcissists that Jordan Peterson considers the most psychologically devastating a human being can experience. The moment when they are forced to see not only what they did, but the permanent legacy of destruction they will leave behind. It is like being confronted with an inverted family tree, where instead of seeing generations of growth and continuity, you see generations of trauma, dysfunction, and pain that will ripple for decades after your death. Peterson revealed what happens in the human mind when narcissists face the brutal reality that their existence has not created love, growth, or positive contribution, but rather a legacy of systematic destruction that will continue impacting lives long after they are gone. If you want to understand what is truly happening inside a narcissist's mind when the mask falls, subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and comment below if you always suspected this collapse was inevitable. The concept of confronting a destructive legacy is fundamentally different from simply acknowledging individual harmful behaviors. Peterson, drawing on a profound understanding of generational psychology and decades of clinical observation, discovered that narcissists build what he calls legacy blindness, a systematic inability to see how their patterns of behavior create ripple effects that extend far beyond their immediate interactions. They may eventually admit to hurting specific people in specific moments, but remain psychologically blind to the fact that they created entire systems of dysfunction that will continue operating long after their direct involvement ends. It's like someone who poisons a well, but only sees the immediate act of pouring the poison, not the fact that the contamination will affect everyone who drinks from it for generations. Picture discovering that every child you raised will carry psychological wounds into their own relationships, creating patterns of dysfunction they will pass on to their children, who will pass them to theirs. Picture realizing that every workplace you infected with manipulation and toxicity developed a culture of mistrust that persists long after you left. Now imagine the psychological shock of suddenly seeing not just what you did to individuals, but how those actions created cascading systems of harm that have taken on a life of their own. According to recent studies in trauma psychology, when narcissists finally grasp the generational scope of their impact, the brain experiences something similar to existential vertigo, a disorienting realization that their entire existence has been not just harmful, but systematically destructive in ways that cannot be undone. It's like discovering you weren't just making individual mistakes, but systematically building a machine specifically designed to generate and perpetuate human suffering. And that machine will continue operating long after you're gone, and then the full scope of their legacy becomes undeniably clear. Peterson describes this moment as one of the most psychologically brutal realizations a human being can face. It is not just guilt about past actions. It is confronting the reality that you have created a destructive legacy that will continue causing harm for decades or centuries after your death, and that this legacy may be the only lasting impact you will have on the world. The first aspect of legacy confrontation, which Peterson calls generational impact recognition, involves seeing how their destructive patterns have been passed down to their children, who are now passing them to their children. It is watching your daughter recreate your manipulative relationship patterns. It is seeing your son develop the same incapacity for empathy that you modeled. It is recognizing that your grandchildren are already showing signs of the same psychological dysfunction you created. Peterson documented cases where narcissists, when confronted with evidence of generational trauma transmission, experience what he calls legacy horror, a profound realization that they have not just hurt people, but have infected entire family lineages with patterns that may persist for multiple generations. It is seeing your own worst characteristics emerging in your descendants like a psychological genetic disease, and recognizing that you were the original source of the contamination. It is understanding that people who never even met you will suffer because of patterns you established decades ago. But are all narcissists capable of grasping the generational scope of their impact? Peterson's research reveals something deeply disturbing. Many simply cannot. The same psychological framework that allowed them to hurt people systematically also prevents them from understanding how trauma propagates through systems and generations. They may see individual instances of dysfunction in their descendants but remain unable to connect those instances to their own behavioral patterns. It is like being colorblind to causation. They can see the effects but cannot perceive their role in creating those effects. Can you imagine being psychologically incapable of understanding cause and effect when it comes to your own impact on others? Peterson explains that some narcissists have such fundamental deficits in systems thinking that they literally cannot grasp how their behavior creates lasting consequences beyond immediate interactions. Drop a comment if you've already seen patterns of dysfunction being passed down through families where the original narcissist seems completely unaware of their role in creating them. The second aspect, which Peterson calls institutional legacy recognition, involves seeing how their toxic behavior infected entire organizations, communities, or social systems. It is recognizing that every workplace where they operated developed cultures of mistrust, manipulation, and fear that persisted long after their departure. It is seeing former colleagues still struggling with anxiety years later. It is recognizing that teams they led never fully recovered their capacity for healthy collaboration. It is understanding that they didn't just hurt individuals, they poisoned entire organizational cultures in ways that continue to impact new employees who never even worked with them directly. Peterson discovered that narcissists confronting institutional legacy frequently experience what he calls contamination. Realization, a sudden awareness that they were not just participants in toxic environments, but active agents of contamination who spread toxicity throughout entire systems. But what happens when narcissists finally grasp the full scope of their destructive legacy will shock you profoundly. Peterson revealed that many develop what he calls legacy despair, a form of hopelessness so profound that it stems not from their current situation, but from recognizing that their life's work has been systematically destructive and that this destruction will outlive them. It's not just feeling bad about what you did, it is recognizing that your existence has made the world measurably worse and that this negative impact will continue compounding long after you are gone. It is confronting the possibility that the world would have been better if you had never existed at all. And here is the most terrifying part. According to Peterson, some narcissists confronting their destructive legacy develop what he calls anti-legacy panic, a desperate attempt to somehow undo or counteract decades of systematic harm in their remaining time. Alive, they may become frantically charitable, desperately apologetic, or obsessively focused on making up for their destructive impact. But these frantic attempts at repair are often themselves manipulative and self-serving, designed more to alleviate their own legacy despair than to actually help their victims. Can you imagine trying to counteract decades of systematic destruction with last-minute gestures that are themselves tainted by your continued need for external validation and control? Peterson describes this as a cruel irony, finally understanding your destructive legacy, but being psychologically incapable of responding to that understanding in genuinely helpful ways. But here is something that will completely change your perspective on narcissistic legacy confrontation. According to Peterson's research, there is a crucial difference between narcissists who confront their legacy and become paralyzed by despair, and those who somehow manage to use that confrontation as motivation for genuine damage control. The difference lies in what Peterson calls legacy acceptance, being able to fully acknowledge the destructive nature of your life's impact while maintaining enough psychological stability to focus on minimizing future harm, rather than trying to magically undo past damage. Peterson argues that this kind of mature legacy acceptance is extraordinarily rare because it requires abandoning all hope of redemption, positive recognition, or psychological comfort about your life's meaning. It is accepting that your biography will be a story of systematic harm and finding peace with dedicating your remaining time to damage control rather than legacy rehabilitation. And then comes a question few dare to explore. Is confronting someone with the full scope of their destructive legacy ethical, even when that legacy is undeniably harmful? Peterson, with his pragmatic yet humane perspective, suggests that sometimes yes, when the alternative is allowing them to continue expanding that legacy without awareness. But he also acknowledges that legacy confrontation can be psychologically devastating in ways that may not lead to positive outcomes. Some narcissists, when confronted with the full scope of their destructive impact, become suicidal. Others withdraw completely and become non-functional. Still others become even more manipulative as they desperately attempt to control how they will be remembered. And here is something that will disturb you deeply. Peterson revealed that even narcissists who appear to genuinely confront their destructive legacy often find ways to use that confrontation as a new source of attention and validation. They become the legacy-aware narcissist who talks extensively about the harm they've caused and their deep understanding of their destructive impact. They use their apparent insight as a way to gain recognition for their profound self-awareness and courage in facing difficult truths. Peterson calls this legacy narcissism. Narcissism, built around being especially aware of and articulate about your own destructive impact. It is a form of grandiosity that incorporates acknowledgement of harm while maintaining the same drive for external validation. Drop your thoughts below. Is it even possible for a narcissist to genuinely confront their destructive legacy without turning that confrontation into a performance? Peterson's answer is deeply pessimistic. He documents extraordinarily rare cases where narcissists, after legacy confrontation, withdraw completely from attempts to discuss, explain, or seek recognition for their insights. Instead, they dedicate their remaining energy to practical actions that minimize ongoing harm without expectation of acknowledgement or credit. But this kind of genuine legacy acceptance without performance is so uncommon that Peterson estimates it occurs in less than 0.5% of narcissists who experience full legacy confrontation. The vast majority either cannot grasp the full scope of their impact or find ways to use that understanding for continued manipulation. And here's something no one tells you about narcissistic legacy confrontation. It can be more traumatic for victims than never having their abuser understand their impact at all. Seeing someone finally grasp the full scope of the harm they caused, but then watching them use that understanding for more sophisticated manipulation can be deeply re-traumatizing. Peterson frequently works with adult children of narcissists who report feeling more hopeless after their parent achieved apparent legacy awareness, because it confirmed that even complete understanding of their destructive impact wasn't enough to generate genuine change or empathy. What you are about to discover now will transform your understanding of personal legacy and psychological accountability. Peterson revealed that true legacy confrontation for narcissists is not about justice for their victims or satisfaction for those who were harmed. It is about a natural psychological process that may or may not lead to behavioral improvement. The confrontation happens when it happens, leads to whatever outcomes it leads to, and may not provide any comfort or closure for those who suffered under their destructive patterns. Understanding this is crucial for victims who may be waiting for their abuser to finally understand what they did. Peterson also warns about something profound. Our contemporary culture makes genuine legacy confrontation extremely difficult, because it provides endless opportunities for narcissists to reframe their destructive impact as somehow positive or necessary. Self-help culture in particular allows people to transform even recognition of harm into a story about their own growth and transformation. And here is the final truth that will reshape your understanding of human legacy. Narcissistic legacy confrontation, when genuine, teaches us that some people's primary impact on the world will be negative, and that this reality must be accepted rather than magically transformed through awareness or good intentions. The ultimate wisdom lies in building your life and relationships in ways that don't depend on narcissists ever truly understanding their destructive legacy. Their legacy awareness is their psychological journey, not a requirement for your healing or peace. Real freedom from narcissistic abuse comes not from waiting for them to confront their legacy, but from understanding that you have the power to break the cycles they created, to heal the wounds they inflicted, and to ensure their destructive patterns don't continue through you into future generations. Your legacy will be determined by how you respond to their destructive legacy, not by whether they ever understand what they created. And that legacy of healing, growth, and conscious cycle breaking will be infinitely more powerful than their legacy of harm. If you've made it this far, you are beginning to understand that your healing and your positive legacy are independent of their capacity for legacy awareness. In the next video, we will explore how Jordan Peterson analyzes why narcissists eventually crumble under their own psychological weight, and why this collapse can become either liberation or complete destruction. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because this journey is revealing profound truths about human psychology that will forever change how you understand accountability, legacy, and the power to transform destructive patterns into healing ones.